Before this video begins, I would like to take a quick moment to thank Bain Books for helping set up the interview that is in this video, and I would also like to apologize for the audio quality. When I was working in editing this video, I ran into some problems and I was not able to get the best audio quality. So you can still hear the interview, but it's just, you might have to turn up your volume a lot. I apologize for that. This was in no way the fault of the author or the publisher that helped set this up. This was my problem in editing, but I still hope that you enjoy the video. Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have the privilege of being joined by Mr. Michael Stackpole. Thank you for being here, sir.
Oh, my pleasure.
So the first question I have is that last year you had this book in the Dark Souls universe that published called Mask of Vindication.
Yep.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what that process was like and how that works as a tie-in book as opposed to an original novel?
Sure. Well, the process of getting it done was very, very odd because a game company in Japan had gotten a licensing deal, which apparently included novels.
Yeah.
And back in the 1980s, the guy who owns that game company had been a journalist and had come through Phoenix because he was interviewing people who had worked on computer games, and I'd worked on Wasteland. And so he spent a day with him in Phoenix, and lo and behold, 30 years later, when they had that ability, said, okay, I know who I want to do this. And I mean, I'd seen him a couple times during the interim, and so I got the offer to go ahead and do that. Nice. And every tie-in book works differently. So everyone's got their own demands, and the one thing I remember is that the Japanese were very insistent that with Dark Souls, frustration is part of their brand.
Yeah.
The players getting frustrated is they see that as an identifiable part of what they do. So they wanted to make sure I was aware of that and included that. And I said, because we were doing a Skype meeting, I said, I don't really think you want me to be frustrating readers, but I think I know what you mean. I think we can work this in. So it was a real interesting process because it was a dual publication. So it's published in Japanese by Katakawa.
Really?
It released at the same time as here in the United States through Yen Press. And Yen Press is a collaboration between Hachette and Katakawa. And so they bring over and publish a lot of Katakawa's light novels and the manga material. But this was their first original novel.
Did you notice that it was particularly more popular in Japan than America, or was it the other way around?
Being an author, I won't see numbers for a while.
Okay.
But I probably should, inquire about that. It's very weird because sometimes that when you're beginning your career, you live and die by those numbers. But having done this so many times and the way the deals are set up, I'm more curious about the numbers, but I'm not.
You don't need to know.
I don't need to know,
I know that one author I know, Dan Wells, when he wrote his first books, they did okay in America, but they took off in Germany, in the German version.
Yeah.
And so for a while, he was living off of those, and so he started thinking about what that audience would like. Have you ever had a novel that you knew had a different audience than you would normally have, whether it was in a different location or whether it was just different than you normally have?
Germany is the second biggest, the number one market outside the English language. So they're big in SF, and I've always sold well there because of the BattleTech stuff.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was doing the Crown Colony stories, we sold them here in the United States, and then my foreign rights agent, Danny Baror, sold them over to Germany.
Really?
He robbed them blind. I mean, it was great. It was absolutely great. But that was the point where I made sure there was a German analog character got worked into the story.
And when you do tie-in books like BattleTech or with Dark Souls, there is an element of making sure that you're not contradicting what needs to happen. And I talked with Brian Young, who's also writing for the BattleTech novels, and he talked about how you do read some things that other people put out, but other times you rely on the editorial staff. When you're doing writing your tie-in books, do you lean more on the editorial staff, or do you like to really immerse yourself and look at the details yourself?
It depends upon what the licensor wants you to do.
Okay.
Sometimes you're writing a book that is going to be a departure, sort of like the Gears of War book that I did.
Yeah.
Was a sharp departure from what had gone on before.
Yeah.
So I was more concerned because we were building toward their future.
Yeah.
Their concern and my concern was taking the characters from the previous situations and showing how they were going to grow into this new future. So quoting back a lot of details from other novels was not really important.
Yeah.
As long as I was hitting the points from the game, that was what is important. And this is the weird thing about tie-in stuff, is you always have to remember that yes, you're writing for an audience that is going to read the novels, obviously, but you have to pay homage to the game.
Yeah.
Because the game is the, especially nowadays with the graphics and the wonderful voice actors. I mean, Carlos Ferro was the guy who played Dom in those, and Dom's death played a big part in my Gears of War book.
Yeah.
So listening to his dialogue, listening to all of that, gave me a sense of the character and gave me a sense of, the emotional connection both between the characters and then the emotional connection that the player had to be picking up, and that's what I wanted to hit. If that rang true, then the book was going to work.
Have you ever had something like that where there was a video game tie-in where you were able to talk with the voice actor themselves, or someone who specifically was on the game in the story and you're able to pick their brain and see what they would think about what you're doing?
No, that pretty much comes after the fact because again, they're not the ones who have approval.
Right.
So you have to play to your number one audience, and that's the guys who are going to say yes or no. But I think it's important in doing the tie-ins that you try and respect everybody else's work, and I've been real lucky when people use characters of mine in other tie-in work. They've been very respectful of what I had done,
Yes.
and so I try and have that courtesy for other people.
So this summer I read your book, Eyes of Silver,
Right.
which I thought was delightful. It was a really fun read, and I thought it was interesting because it didn't feel really like a fantasy book, even though it felt like a historical novel.
Right.
And it had a lot of historical tie-ins, whether it was the cultures and the wars and events that were going on. Can you talk a little bit about what that process was like, incorporating history into that book?
Well, my degree's in history, so
Okay.
this was the thesis I never wrote, maybe. But I find politics and history really, really fascinating. And also, I grew up Catholic, so that's also my Catholic
that.
novel. Yeah.
Yep. I
So
noticed
so
that.
you have to work out all of these demons. But so it was a lot of fun. Having the historical precedents there, and yet learning for novelistic purposes where to deviate from them and what to bring in. I think part of the inspiration for that book was it was always noted that the Russians have never been defeated when the invasion has come west to east, but the Mongols who went east to west just blew through, proto-Russia, and so their terror has always been, the things coming from the east. And so it was, playing with that, and then obviously getting to play with the religions. And when I wrote that, obviously it was well before 2001, so we weren't involved in Afghanistan directly.
Right.
But it became more relevant in discussing how the dynamics work in that area. And so again, that was a lot of fun for that book.
And on that book, it has a very unique cover. It feels very much like a sweeping romance
Right.
or an epic. How does the process work as an author? 'Cause some publishers I know, the author's intricately involved, and some publishers, you get surprised when you see it. What was the process like for that and some of your others?
Well, you have to remember that the cover is a sales tool, okay, and very few authors understand marketing it well enough to advise on the cover.
Right.
So the vast majority of covers, I get surprised, and delightfully so. The only cover I ever had any influence on was on the cover of the Back to War, the
Really?
fourth X-wing book. But that's because I happened to be in New York, talking to my editor when the art director came in to say, "Look, what should we do for the cover?" And since and so they gave me the two alternatives, and the one that they used was the first alternative they suggested, which I thought was great, because the other alternative would have given away the climax of the book. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I actually got a T-shirt that has the cover of the Back to War without any of the words on it. It's just the cover photo. Well before I ever read a single Star Wars novel, and so I just had that shirt. And then I went out and I started reading the novels, and I realized, wait a second, that's what this is from. So I purposefully wore that shirt on the day that I was reading the book.
Very cool.
And I brought it to you at a convention, and you saw the shirt first, and you were like,
Right.
you've got to be a book reader.
Yeah.
My next question is about your book, Italian Revenant.
Okay.
That book came out in the 90s, but
Mhm.
you've recently released the sequel, Italian Nemesis. Is that
Right.
via your Patreon.
Yeah.
That's a very unique marketing strategy that I like because it's exploring other ways.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that the decision chosen for producing Italian Nemesis through there?
Italian Revenant is the book that I've gotten the most requests for a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
And I had always wanted to do Italian Nemesis, but never had a contract for it.
Yeah.
And had a lot of other paying work,
Right.
getting in the way, like Dark Souls and
Right.
those things. So doing it via Patreon was just seemed like a fun way to actually do that,
Mm-hmm.
and to actually get it paid for by some very nice patrons who stuck through it. I mean, the fear that I had in doing that is, it is very much a first draft.
Yeah.
And so there are rough spots in there, and there are things. So right now I'm in the process of figuring out. I think I'm going to have to, because it ended up being a massive project. Probably going to have to split it into 3 parts.
Really?
Yeah, and I just have to figure out how to make each one of those parts stand alone. But it is 280,000 words.
Ooh,
So
that
it
is a lot longer than the original.
Oh yeah, a lot longer than the original. By about 100,000 words. So I just have to kind of figure that out. But it was an interesting process. But you can see, first draft issues that always get corrected in the second draft. You never see them. Something that I thought was going to be a cool thing worked up to a point, and then I just kind of forgot about it and went on without it. Now I've got to either pull that through or yank it out. But I'll probably end up pulling it through.
Well, the one advantage it has, besides being able to kind of pay for itself with the Patreon, is that if you keep it up there, it allows people to see what how it changed.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah,
once
yeah.
you release another version of it, you can be like, if you want to see the original, like Brandon Sanderson did with the Way of King's Prime.
Sure.
You can see the original, and people can. It'll be like a specialty item, and people will search for the differences in there.
Oh yeah. Well, the differences will be pretty easy to see, I think.
Have you thought about if it's going to have a paperback release, and if you have a timetable for that, or is that way?
I don't have a timetable for it yet. Just out of courtesy to Random House, since they published the first one, I figure when I get it squared away, I would give them first bite at that apple.
Yeah.
And if they decide to pass, then it's a question of do we treat it as a brand new trilogy and we look for another publisher, or do I do it as a Kickstarter and just do it myself? And so all of those things are kind of on the table.
Yeah, and 10 years ago, you wouldn't really have many of those options.
No.
But now, Kickstarter's becoming viable,
Mhm.
self-publishing is viable, and shopping it around is viable. I know that Tim Zahn, he had done Icarus Hunt years ago,
Right.
and then didn't do anything with it, and then moved to a different publisher, and they're treating that as a prequel.
Yeah,
So you could treat Italian Revenant as the prequel to Italian Nemesis.
Exactly. Yeah.
Next, I want to talk about one of your Star Wars books,
Mhm.
your novel I, Jedi,
Okay.
which really I felt was a lot like Frederick Forsyth's Day of the Jackal because it wove a character through history, and specifically went through Kevin's history with
Right.
the Jedi Academy trilogy. I know you said you worked with him. What was the process of working with him? Were you guys on the phone together? And how did you make sure that all the historical elements
Right.
worked out for it?
Well, first thing I did is I went through the Jedi Academy trilogy and I indexed it.
Okay.
Okay, so and so I indexed it. I had a timeline. I knew what the scenes were going to be, where people had to show up and stuff. And I talked. Kevin and I have been friends for many, many years, and I talked with him and said, look, I'm slipping Corrin undercover in because he had only named 6 out of the first 12.
Right.
And he had said, yeah, he had intentionally done that. And then there were a couple of continuity errors or spaces that I was able to exploit, and I mentioned those to him. But the big thing I remember is when I was getting down to the end of that book, I called him up and I said, "Hey, you're doing the Young Jedi Knights. Do you do anything more with Exar Kun's Sith Temple?" And he said, "Nope." And I said, "Great, I'm blowing it up." And because that was the way to cap that book,
Right, yes.
yeah.
Big
And
big.
yeah, so it was, and so that was a lot of fun. I mean, back in those days, it was very much the Wild Wild West, and even when I was doing, because Talion Revenant wrote itself in 31 days out of a 41-day period. I mean, it wrote itself really, really fast. But even so, probably, every other day at the very least, Tim and I would be on the phone because he was doing Spectre and Vision. And so he literally sent me the pages where he had created Elagos,
Right.
who is 15 years in the future at that point, and 10 or 15 years, I forget the exact numbers, but and so he sent me those pages. I read those over. I regressed Elagos in responsibility and maturity 10 years, ran him through the last third of iJedi, and then packed those pages off to Tim just as he was getting back to using Elagos. And so he took what I'd done with Elagos, re-aged him back up to where he had them. And so we had this set of continuity going with those characters. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, when you can do that, when you're working with writers who you respect, and you get to play back and forth with their work.
Right.
And Tim at the same time was using some of my characters. I also used Mara Jade.
Yeah.
So just respecting each other, showing each other the pages, is this how the character would act? And I do remember I didn't get a chance to show Tim the chapter where Mara Jade comes into the Sith Temple and saves Corrin until the book was published.
Oh no.
Yeah, there just hadn't been time. But I handed him a copy of the book and directed him, and he just read it over and just nodded. Yeah, At that point, I think I'd worked with Mara Jade enough between that and the comics to find the characters.
Plus, you guys are close enough that
Oh, yeah.
you both know what each other would want or something.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
don't think that would be an issue. I know that there were times where people were using something at Tim's and just didn't tell him, and he just had to be like, it's not I don't own it anymore.
Right,
so
right,
you use it for a time. We also were on the team that worked on the new Jedi Order.
Correct.
And I know you were working at the beginning, and I'm just curious. We've talked. There's whole podcasts on the whole why Chewie, the whole
Sure.
Chewie situation happened. I'm curious how much of where the series went were you guys thinking of? There's a lot of events in Star by Star that are big galaxy-changing events. In the final book by James Luceno, there's big events. Did you guys have all of that from the beginning, or was it more rough ideas and then they planned it out later?
We had a good handle on the start, but especially with anything attached to Hollywood. Hollywood is very much of a collaborative process, more so than writing an individual novel is. So as there is more feedback and as things go, they make changes to the story, and incrementally it shifts off of where you thought it was going to the end. I think Jim Luceno, who was also there at the beginning and consistently through to the end, I think he really helped shepherd it and keep it largely on track. There were certain things that got done that I would have lobbied against, but but that's just because of how I felt about certain characters and things like that. So but again, you have to respect the authors
Right.
doing stuff for the dramatic purposes in the book. So.
Have you ever worked on another multimedia project or multi-book project where you had a kind of team that met and did planning like that?
Oh yeah, we've done that with BattleTech for years and years and years.
Yeah.
It used to be every 3 years you have a 5-year plan, and we just did this earlier this year for BattleTech, plotting out what we're going to do for the next 5 years.
Is that the authors and editors, or do you have licensing people in, and how big is the team typically in these types of things?
Anywhere between 8 and a dozen, and it works pretty well. I mean, it's obviously the people who own the property,
right,
who are controlling the property that you work with. So it was in that case Catalyst staffers and then a lot of freelancers, and we all discuss the stuff out and we break it down. And the nice thing is when you have got a lot of creative people in the room, there are going to be impasses, there are going to be problems,
right,
and usually there's one or two individuals who will step up and say, what if we do this?
Mm-hmm.
What if we pull this together this way? And you watch the relief on everybody else's face, and they go, yeah, okay, that'll work.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly enjoy doing that kind of thing in these creative settings.
And I can imagine you learn a lot about writing just from hearing other authors and people in the business as well. But you've also written a lot, so.
Well, you do. I mean, the way you really learn how to write and about writing is actually reading.
Yeah.
One of the dangers in listening to authors, except for me, and I say that because I teach a whole bunch of how to write classes.
Right.
Yeah. But there are a lot of writers who will tell you what it is they do, but they really don't analyze what it is they do. So they're telling you what it is they think they do, and sometimes no, they don't do that. And so you have to get down into the trenches. You have to actually read what's going on and figure it out. And we all learn to write by reading, and hopefully by analyzing what other people have done and figuring out how to make it work for us.
So, do you have any books that are upcoming that you can talk about?
No, other than trying to get Tally and Nemesis in shape, and then I'm doing. I'm scheduled to do a Shadowrun novel, and I'm scheduled to do another BattleTech novel. It's a nice thing of going to those meetings is you get work.
Yes. Who's available?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I want that one. Yeah. You guys talk amongst yourselves. I'm taking that book.
And then, where can people find you online to follow you for updates?
Well, probably the thing that Elon Musk is ruining right now. I will be probably. I will hang in there because there are a lot of people who still hang in there.
Right.
I just have to figure out in my workflow how I'm going to bring Threads and Blue Sky into that to try and expand that stuff out. And obviously there is the Patreon project. So
I know that there were a lot of people who were all ready to move over to Threads, and they lost a lot of the regular users, so they have to build it back up again.
Yeah.
So it's hard because people want to try alternatives, but
yeah.
if they're not successful, you have to stick with what's working.
Yeah, social media, success in general, but all of these things, they're very much of a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
So, the latest and greatest. I mean, I was in podcasting at the beginning, and then there was the lull, and now it's huge again.
Yeah.
Is there going to be another lull? Of course there'll be another lull, and then we'll get huge again. Absolutely. So it's figuring where to jump in and just do stuff you're comfortable with.
Well, thank you so much for doing the interview.
Oh, my
today.
pleasure.
And you can find Dark Souls in bookstores and online.
Yep.
And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.